Hello and welcome to another episode of the SEO Unplugged podcast. I'm your host Itamar Blauer, and today I'm joined with Martin Splitt, who is a search advocate at Google. Martin, hello, how are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm doing fantastically well. Thank you so much for Itamar. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. And this conversation is going to be very, very fascinating because, the SEO industry you need developers, right? We got to love developers. But what we're essentially going to be focusing on in this episode is SEO and developer relationships. So, right off the bat, Martin, as a developer yourself, why do you think that SEOs need developers and vice versa?
Well, why SEOs need developers is more or less obvious to me, at least. But I guess it's not clear to everyone why I would say something like that. So we are working with digital products, and specifically, most of us have some sort of digital web experience, be it a marketing website, be it a full-blown web application, but you have something that is built on the web. And these things are usually built by developers. If not directly by developers, then at least the CMSs or services or platforms that you use have been and are continuously built by developers. So having a developer to help you judge if something is possible or impossible, or to debug technical challenges, is essential, I would say. And the other way around is also important, because in the other direction, if you are a developer building a digital product, that's great. But if no one knows about it, and how do you know about things? You search for them. I search for a solution to my problem. If your product, no matter how great it is, no matter what fantastic technology it uses, how fast it loads, whatever, if I don't find it through a search engine of my choice, there's a good chance that I will never know it existed.
Yeah, that's a fair point. So it's kind of like, you can't really have one without the other in the
Yes.
majority of cases, I would assume,
Yes.
unless it's, for instance, somebody just creating a blog and, they want to do all that. They're maybe not selling a product, but for the majority of, let's say, business cases,
Mhm.
then that is something that is pretty essential, I would say, especially considering, the increased amount of saturation of businesses trying to market their stuff online and just their presence. There comes a point where, especially as the web evolves, there is going to definitely be a need for that kind of affinity between SEOs and developers, right? Is that
Yeah.
right in
Yeah,
suggesting?
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, great. So with that, once we kind of understand that context, what do you think is the current state of SEO and developer relations or
That's a
relationships?
really tricky question to answer globally. I think in general, a lot of SEOs are picking up on the fact that they should have a good relationship with their development team. And some of them might not know how to get there, because the relationship as it stands most of the time is strained, I would say. Strained because, on one hand, developers often feel that SEO is snake oil and just like stuff that is arcane and weird and downright bad sometimes. It's like, why would we do something that deceives users? We shouldn't be doing this. Why are we buying links? Why are we doing all this weird stuff here? And do we have to do this? Is this a good thing to do? Why do we have to have headlines that look exactly like the headlines that I hate to see on my social media feed, for instance? So there is a bit of a hesitation from the developer side. And then also, a lot of SEO is complex and interdisciplinary. So, for instance, you could say, like, yeah, so the fact that our links look the way that they look is doesn't matter, because users see them and they can click on them, but search engines don't see them. Search engines can't actually use them. How is that a problem? Why would I care? And you need to understand a lot of background and, like, a bunch of context that you might not necessarily have as a developer. So that's a tricky one to navigate, and a lot of SEOs are trying to get better relationships or have better relationships with the developers, but not necessarily the developers trying to have better relationships to the SEOs, because it's not easy to see. And also, developers are often overwhelmed with requests from business, from marketing, from SEO, from security, from business development, whatever. Like, it comes from all directions, and one has to fall off at least. And sometimes you can't really like push away sales because they are the ones that very easily tie to your KPIs. You can't really push off management because they are the ones who keep you employed more or less. Security and marketing, or security and SEO, are often the ones that are not having enough leverage to actually get the developers time and get the developers attention, even though they also have a lot of impact, obviously. But it's not so obvious as with the others. Like if I implement a feature that sales asked me for and then they close a 6-digit contract, then that is very visible. Of course, if we are getting hacked and everything that we have in terms of data gets leaked, or we have like a ransomware attack because of a fault that I haven't fixed, that is also very visible. It just doesn't happen as often and doesn't happen as immediate. Like I ignore you now, and then in half a year we might have the fallout from that. Whereas in marketing and sales, you might have a more, or sorry, in business development and sales, you might have a more direct impact. So I think it's also that SEOs oftentimes think that developers are just maliciously ignoring them, which might not necessarily be the case. It might just be that they're not the people they need to convince first. They should probably talk to other stakeholders first so that they agree that developer time should be spent on SEO initiatives.
Hmm. No, and that's really, I'm sure for a lot of people that is going to be quite eye-opening, because as SEOs, it's like, I mean, I've seen it firsthand where it's like, you identify a problem. You're like, okay, I know what we need to fix it. So come on, let's get this fixed. But in reality, in the more wider business sense, like the things that you've mentioned, from a developer's perspective, there's a lot more at play than just having to do what the SEOs ask for you to do.
Yes.
And I think then with understanding that, I mean, SEOs probably need to just acknowledge that developers aren't there to fulfill your requests 24/7. They're not like, you know, I'd feel weird saying this, but it's not like they're like a pet, like a puppy that you can kind of say, roll over and jump. And you know what I mean? It's like, well, first of all, they are humans. But second of all, it's like, there's other things that they need to get on with. The whole work doesn't revolve around you, which is quite important, because I would assume that, without understanding that context, that can also cause backlash in terms of the relationships you have within your team or with your developers as an SEO. If you're, say, chasing up, week after week, without, trying to think or understand of the wider issues around the business and the wider functions. But with saying that, though, what do you think SEOs should do if they want to have better relationships with developers and vice versa? So do you have any tips in order to
Mm.
strengthen that relationship so that there is no, or to limit the likelihood of there being fallouts and things like that?
That again is a tricky one, because for that you need to understand where the strain in the relationship comes from. And that again depends a lot on your specific organization. I think if you are noticing that your requests are not getting anywhere, you're not getting the results you're asking for, then that is an indication that you definitely need to work with stakeholders. And the best thing to figure that one out is to talk to your developers and say, like, so hi, just quick question. I have the feeling that you are under like a lot of pressure, and I think we need to like do this thing. This is important for our business, and I need you to tell me what I can do as an SEO. What can I do to help you make that point if you agree? So a good starting point might be to say like, hi, so I have a question for you. What is it that you are looking for when you're choosing what to work on next? And then you can ask, and why is it not my thing? Or why is it not that, why is it that you don't see the value of what I'm proposing? And then you might find that they say, I think it's all bullshit. And then that's a different conversation to have. Then you need to like explain why SEO makes sense and how much impact it has. And you might need to show some data. You can, for instance, show Search Console. You can show analytics that tells you, look, 50% of our traffic actually comes from, or even better, like 20% of our conversions come from organic search. And currently we are losing in these areas, and we do much better, which would lead to a better bottom line, which would lead to bonuses and so on and so forth. Um, and that might be the starting point for that. If it's like, I understand and I see the value, I just don't have the time, then that's a stakeholder conversation to be had. And also generally, and that goes for both sides, as a developer, I like to ask an SEO that I work with, what is it, if you get an hour of my time, what would you do with it? And that is an interesting thing, because then usually they give me work for 10 hours and I say like, no, 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 you don't have that much time. Okay, what is the one thing, if I would do it for you, that you would like me to do for you? And then sometimes it's small things like, oh, I noticed on these pages, all our links are actually spans with on-click handlers, and Google doesn't see them. And so we are losing internal linking that we could definitely use here to help Google understand this page structure. And that is maybe an easy fix. Maybe they tell you it's actually not an easy fix, and then the conversation can move from there. Maybe there's steps in between that we can take. Maybe there's a temporary solution that we can take. Maybe, again, it needs stakeholder buy-in, in which case you can go and get that stakeholder buy-in so the developer can implement it. It's an ongoing conversation then, but the starting point should usually generally be, from the SEO's perspective, what is it that I could do for you to have a better grasp on why you need to do these things and how to make them actually happen? And then from the developer's point of view, what is the one thing that I could do in an hour that would make your life easier or better?
Hmm. And but with that, I guess it's more of just like, with it doesn't matter SEO developer, it's just kind of
Mm.
people skills,
Yeah,
I suppose, right? Because it's like,
it is.
essentially we're saying, instead of you going to somebody saying, "Hey, can you do this for me?" It's like, well, you don't understand the context of where they're at and what they
Yeah,
do, and it's almost like you're only thinking of your wants and your needs from your own sake. You got to think about what's in it for the other person. What do they have? You need to understand that they are
yeah, yeah.
valuable just as much as you are, right?
That's generally true. That is true. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like taking that approach will, I guess I would hope that, makes the other person be more open, and you can actually
Hmm.
develop and understand each other much
Hmm.
better. And of course, that's gonna hopefully lead to more efficient and effective actions being taken, as opposed to me just say, "Hey, dev, you're a dev, can you do
Hmm.
this for me?" And then, but they're just like, "Come on,
Yeah.
we get that so much, right?" Because I
Yeah,
guess,
everyone wants something. Yeah,
yeah, so I think the takeaway with that is just, yeah, just be nice, got to really like take time and, yeah, get to understand what the troubles are and what you can do, more importantly, to make their life easier. Because if you can make the other person's life easier, oh geez, that's going to massively help, everyone's case, right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, so with that then, the last bit that I want to get into is something that can be, we've got to think of the gray areas sometimes between SEOs
Mm-hmm.
and developers. So, SEO is an ever evolving field and industry, right? So as
Mm-hmm.
SEO evolves, especially within the technical side, and I'll use an example for this, if we talk about Core Web Vitals, for instance, where do you draw the line where an SEO might end up going, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, into a developer's territory, quote unquote? And how should this be communicated so that you don't step on toes? And,
Mm.
could egos be clashing because of this? So, like, how would you manage this sort of scenario?
That is an interesting question, and that's a very tricky one, because I've definitely observed rivalry in this areas, specifically because SEOs, more tech savvy SEOs, were like, "Oh, we're just gonna build like this workaround solution," and then developers find out about it because it screws with, it creates a bug that they need to fix, but they haven't caused. So it's like, why is this even here? Like, why this is now falling back on us, but it's actually not coming from us. So yeah, that's a really, really tricky one. And I guess for most developers or SEO conversations or relationships, it's going to be that when you see a technical problem, you probably want to discuss the problem with your developers rather than bring solutions. because it's a tricky thing to know if you're actually on the right track. And oftentimes there's red herrings where you think like, oh, I think this is this problem and we can solve it by this. I Googled this and or Stack Overflow says this is the solution. And then it turns out that the developer is just annoyed by that because it's like, ah, it doesn't work. And I don't want to spend like half an hour explaining to you why that solution doesn't work for us. But I understand that there is a problem that we need to work on. So rather, when you see a problem and you're like, ooh, that looks like a technical problem rather than anything else, then go to the developers with that problem and then work with them to find out what the possible solution is, because the developers know best what solutions work in the context of your product and which ones might not work. That's a safe assumption. The other thing is that as a developer, you shouldn't just make random assumptions. And whenever you are choosing a technology or a solution, you're choosing it based on requirements. And the reality of developers is that they don't know all the SEO requirements. They will never. That with design, it's fine. Like with design, or even like with content authorship, with like copywriting, they know, okay, so like the people who need to edit this content need to be able to do this like every day. So they are not very tech savvy. So we need like an interface for them to do this. But for SEO, it's often not very clear what the requirements are, and they should ask. It's like, okay, hey, by the way, we are building this thing here that has an accordion, and we are trying to lazy load the content here. Is there anything that we need to look at from an SEO's perspective? Rather than just going like, oh, so this is really small code size, this is really performant, it works in all the browsers, let's choose this one, as they might do, and then end up with something that actually is fundamentally broken for Google search. Not out of malice, just because they don't know. It's fine to not know, you just need to ask the right people. And I think this line is blurry at best, but if in doubt, talk to the other side. And I'd rather say talk to them earlier than later than anything else, because the longer you wait and the more you fall in love with the solution to whatever it is that you're looking at, the harder it is to be open for a no from the other side. And the no from the other side is very likely not, because hypothetically, if you come to me with a perfect solution that just works, why on earth would I say no? You just did my job for me. Awesome. But unfortunately, 90% of the cases, 9 out of 10 times, it's not the right solution for what we're trying to accomplish. And then, as I said, it's wasteful to have to discuss why it's not working, why it's not the right solution. So, yeah, it's very tricky to know where the boundary is. Definitely, if you are touching other people's work, you should talk to them and do that earlier than later.
Yeah, and you raised some really really good points there, and I think one of the main things to focus on is when it does, like you're saying, get to the point where you might be, maybe unintentionally like stepping on toes because you are going into, let's say, as an SEO, into developer territory because you're thinking of this solution that you think is great for search, but you just go with it anyway. And I think that's the dangerous part because, like you're saying, once you find an idea that you like, the longer you have gone with
Mhm.
that, it's very, very difficult to kind of backtrack and kind of maybe even mentally think, oh, this might not actually be the best for the better or greater good of, the organization generally, because you might be going with a solution that will have bugs and it will take a long time to fix. And then if, a developer starts telling you that, hey, this is actually wrong, there are errors with this, that doesn't help the relationship side of things because you'll feel like, that it's a personal attack on your
Yeah.
solution and something that you've invested a lot of time into. So like you said, the best thing to do is as soon as it gets to that sort of area, just talk, with the other person and
Mhm.
really, like we're saying, get to understand the solution, what you want done, and see if it's viable or not. Because at the end of the day, it's like, I will never ever like to think that, for example, a developer is going to, want to mess up or screw over the SEO. At the end of
Yeah.
the day, you're part of a team, right? So you're working
Yeah.
together. So it's like trying not to have that way of thinking and just trying to think that, everyone's trying to help each other. So be as transparent as you can and avoid doing things just for the sake of like you wanted to do it because you found a cool idea. Like always talk it through, make sure it actually works and is viable, and that's the best way to go.
Absolutely. More
Awesome.
communication is pretty much always better.
Yeah, communication is key. I feel like they say that all the time, but it's surprising how often that doesn't actually come through
Yeah.
in the real world.
We gotta say that louder for the people in the back. Yes.
Yep, communication is key. Please remember that and apply it. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up this episode, Martin. It was absolutely
Awesome.
fantastic to get you on here. So, where
Oh,
can people find you if they want to ask any questions or just want to say hi or even look into
mhm.
the diving content that you're putting up a lot online, which
The
is
diving content that is on YouTube, if you look for diving for fun, if you have work-related questions, your best bet is to go either to developers.google.com/search, where you find links to the office hours, the help forums, and our general documentation that has a lot of things already covered. I'm on Twitter as well. If you search for Martin Splitt on Twitter, you're going to find one person, that is me. And alternatively, you can also check out our YouTube channel for Google Search Central, which is youtube.com/Google Search Central, where we have lots of video content too.
awesome. Martin, thank you so much. And thank you
No,
to
thank
all.
you so much for having me.
Oh, it's been a blast. Thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next episode. Hey, you've reached the end of this video, but don't worry, there's plenty more great content that you can watch right now. All you have to do is click one of the 2 video links on the left side of the screen. And also, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell to never miss out on future uploads.